Hey, Mark,
Hey, Jeff.
what was the last book you read?
Oh, man, I read a great one over the weekend, and I think we're going to talk about it today.
Welcome to MasterMined, the behavioral health business podcast. We go beyond the clinical to explore what it really takes to build, grow, and lead a successful behavioral health organization. Each episode features candid, practical conversations with industry leaders, offering strategies to scale your business while staying true to your mission. From branding and marketing to leadership, culture, and compliance, we cover the tools you need to balance care and commerce with confidence. MasterMined is brought to you by Snapshot, a digital agency on a mission to serve with heart, execute with excellence, and build something bigger together. And now, welcome to MasterMined.
Hey, everyone, welcome back to MasterMined, where we dig deep into the minds behind modern marketing and leadership. I'm Jeff Skillen, joined, as always, by Mark Scrivner, and today we're flipping the mic towards our third host and friend and fellow strategist, Lee Pepper.
Lee's been our co-pilot on this podcast, but today he's in the spotlight. His new book, Never Outmatched, is coming out in September, and it's already one of the most insightful business books I've read in years. Part battlefield tactics, part boardroom playbook.
Lee draws from his time as a military officer, marketing executive, and leader in behavioral health to show how timeless military strategies apply to modern business. And I promise this is not a rah-rah leadership book. It's sharp, honest, and filled with hard-won wisdom.
So today, we're digging into some of the key mental models in the book, the stories behind them, and how you, the listener, can apply them immediately. Whether you lead a company or just want to lead yourself better, I'm super excited to dig into this conversation today. Lee, Jeff, man, this is going to be a really special one today. Really, this is going to be fun. So thanks for being here, and thanks for letting us do this one, Lee.
Well, thank you both. I mean, I'm so honored to be in the guest chair today.
So is it easier or harder to be in the guest chair?
Well, I would say it's easier for me because I got to see you guys practice the intro. You know, how many times? 5, 6 times. So yeah, it's easier for me today. That'll be in the after credits. Craig, we'll have to put in the pre-production work.
Yeah. Well, Lee, let's go ahead and kick this off. I mean, this book is packed with all kinds of insights, but it's also very personal to you. I guess at what point did you feel like Never Outmatched had to become a book?
Yeah, I think back to COVID. It's like everything these days. You know, you always think back to that moment. And for me, I think it was COVID. I was just ostensibly retiring, you know, from the Meadows, and it was to go and write this book. And then, you know, that retirement didn't live very long because then I started getting calls for, you know, consulting and could you come look at my program? And so the book kind of was there. I was working on it, but about 18 months ago, I got really serious. I can't tell you like what caused me to all of a sudden start tracking my word count and was I actually working every day. Maybe it was because my kids were getting ready to finish and be out of the house and I was going to be an empty nester. But it was about 18 months ago that I got really serious.
Yeah.
You know, Lee, I should start off by saying this, like we've all kind of gone through various phases in our career and we've all worn multiple hats, in your case, a helmet, right? I should start off by saying thank you for your service.
Thank you.
A lot of people in our industry may not know your military background, so I think it's really an interesting side that you're choosing to share with everyone.
I think most people, when they meet me and then they find out maybe later in the relationship that I was in the Army, they're like, you were in the Army? And so it is kind of interesting. And, you know, the way I kind of interpret that is that less than 1% of our citizenry will serve in the United States military. And I don't say that as a judgment. That's just where we are as an all-volunteer Army. So that means that 99% of people don't have experience or kind of any way to kind of think about military service. So I'm hoping that this book is going to maybe open up and challenge some of these things that people think about the military.
Well, I completely agree with that. And then you know, when I started reading the book, which, you know, thanks for sharing the advanced copy, I knew in the preface right away that this was going to be different. I knew this was going to be a different book, and I was grateful because I read a lot of business books, and I was like, okay, this is refreshing. So in the preface, it doesn't take you long before you just jump right off the deep end. You talk about a moment where you were presenting to a private equity group, and the feedback that you got was basically like, tone it down, just read the PowerPoint.
Absolutely.
And from there, you jumped into a different place. So I'm curious, recount that experience and where did you go with that?
Yeah, and Jeff, you've had some personal experience and work with me over the years where you've seen this, kind of in action. But, that was a moment where I had been invited to Chicago to do a presentation to our private equity sponsor. It was Sterling Partners at the time, to their big annual conference, and they wanted to learn, like, what was Foundations doing, this little company in Nashville, how were they taking digital marketing by storm? And so they asked me would I come up and present? I said, absolutely. So I developed the presentation, and they didn't like what I was presenting. And really, it was the way I was presenting it, because I was doing it as a video, because I was trying to showcase that things have changed, right? And they didn't want me to just do the video. They wanted me to show up there and stand behind the lectern and just lecture and present kind of the way they've done it for 40 or 50 years. And that was my point, is that the world has changed. Marketing has changed. And so I stood my ground, even though I had some of my partners, who were in the C-suite telling me, Lee, just do what they want. And I think that I wanted to start with that chat. I mean, the preface, I wanted to start the book that way, because that's the pressure that you get as a leader. Just do what they want. Just do it the way we've always done it. And that's really what this book gets to about Never Outmatched, is you're not hired to do the status quo. You're hired to innovate. You're hired to lead. So go do it. No matter what people are telling you, you've got to stick to your guns.
Great pun.
I try to work a few in there, Jeff, from time to time.
That's very.
Yeah.
It's not a hobby, right?
Yeah. Well, and Jeff, I think at some point you may remember back when we were selling. We were going to market, and it was the second time, and we had gone up to Chicago to do our big roadshow demonstration in front of our sponsors, and it was terrible. Like it was terrible. We had gone up there, and literally we came back on Friday, and the PE sponsor said, "That was terrible, guys. You have got to figure this out." And the reason it was terrible was because they had given us the slides. Like for me personally, it wasn't my words. It wasn't my slides. Like, what am I presenting on? And so we had the chance where we all got to kind of just break apart, and I went to Jeff's house, and we reworked my deck the way I wanted to do it.
Yep.
And present it. And it was a great success from there.
I recall we had a 24-hour assignment.
Yeah.
We reworked your slides, we rehearsed,
Yeah.
and I mean the metamorphosis was tremendous.
Yeah.
Well, as lovely as the trip down memory lane is, which I love, by the way, which is great. We're here to talk about your book. So let's jump into chapter 1, and the thing that you're talking about here is something that we can all relate to, which is being outnumbered. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that a lot of people in our field, and frankly any field, it's like it becomes a thing they want to point to and say why they cannot be successful. So how does that relate in this book?
Well, that's a really good. I hear that all the time, Jeff, and I've personally experienced that many times. I think the key for me is that when I was in the Army, and I enlisted. I went to Officer Candidate School, then I went to Armor School. When you're in Armor School, a lot of these things are starting to kind of come to fruition in my mind about leadership. And the thing is, in the Army, you never have it perfectly the way you plan it out, right? You're going to have weather kick in. You're going to have terrain isn't what you're expecting. You're going to have maybe the troops you thought you had weren't trained as well, or maybe you've got less troops. And in the military, you can't just not do it and say, oh, well, I don't have all these things, right? You'll get overrun, or you'll get hurt or injured or captured. So you cannot just sit there. And to me, it's the same way in business, right? You're never going to have all the budget. You're never going to have all the scope. You're never going to have the schedule you want. And you can't just stop and say, oh, I not today. No, you have to figure things out. And that's where I came up with this idea of Never Outmatched, because in the face of adversity, I determined early on through my military training that I was never going to be outmatched. We could figure things out. And I think that's why I started the book this way, is that there's a lot more inside of each of us than sometimes we think. And I believe that it's also a great metaphor for recovery for people in behavioral health. I think at some point, people that are going through their own personal struggles, like they at some point realize that, okay, they can figure it out too, that they will have that inner, that I'm not going to be outmatched today.
Yeah, and Lee, in chapter 1, I mean, you also talk a lot about focusing on the quick wins.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. You've actually pushed us too when we've worked together on some client accounts. I mean, hey, let's get the quick wins right off the bat, and let's start showing some really significant value. And, with that, like, how do you personally find those quick wins, those small wins, when you're looking at a big, giant goal that you're going after?
Yeah, the quick wins are so critical, Mark, because it builds momentum. And momentum is really what starts. People will ask me, well, how did you get Foundations kind of just up and running? Well, we didn't just make it up and run day one. Like, we had to get some small, quick wins, and that built the momentum, right? It's like a snowball rolling down that hill. It really is. Like, you've got to get some quick wins. So, like, when it comes to digital marketing and some of the work that we do with your team, Mark, it might be, can we just get the logins to all the accounts, right? Can we just make sure that we're posting on a somewhat regular basis? It doesn't seem like it's huge, but it's these small little victories. And once you start communicating that, right, to your leadership team, all of a sudden they start to get some excitement and some pride too, and they start to see that it's a system. It can't just be a one and done. And so I think that that's really critical in the military. It's the small wins, it's the quick wins that builds that momentum.
Yeah, it's like that snowball effect that you see, and that momentum starts.
Because it's funny. I've got my youngest son, Cy, has enlisted in the Army, and so he's off in basic training right now. And we had the chance to talk to him for a few minutes yesterday, evening. And the thing is, I can hear in his voice, he's getting these quick wins, right? He's a newbie. He doesn't know anything, but he's got his uniform, right? They're learning how to march. They're learning how to pack their rucksack. They're learning the basics of firing their weapon. It's these little quick wins that are building that momentum for him and for his platoon. It's so critical, and it's critical in business.
Before we move on to another subject, I want to dig a little deeper into that, because as a civilian looking at the military situation, of course, you have this idea that you follow orders, and it's like, and you follow orders because that's chain of command. Mm-hmm. Well, in business, you'd like to think that that's what happens, but it seems to me like these small wins are the kinds of things that you can overcome people's skepticism, and then you get them to see that it's like there's intent behind the order, not just following the order. And so I'm really curious, like, put that in context from a military perspective and a business perspective. Is it the same thing or not really?
I think that I think a lot of people have this misconception that you get in the military and you're just told what to do all along the way. And there is some of that, but it's related to training. We have in the military, you have the best training in the world, right? And you also have access to the best equipment, in the best lessons, that have been learned and communicated down. But when you're in the training exercise, or you're in that moment of battle, like, it's what you've learned and how you've been trained and how you execute it then. And you have to have freedom of movement, good military term, right? Because you don't know what that shape is looking like on the battlefield. It's the same thing in business. And I find that in a lot of our businesses, we don't train people as well as we think we do.
Right.
And so we're kind of lacking the training, and then we micromanage people to death, and then we wonder, how come my team's not innovative? Well, you cannot command innovation, right? You have to set, what I talk about in the book is commander's intent. What's the mission? And are you getting communicated back so they know the mission? We call it a read back. And then you let them go and you figure it out using that never outmatched mentality, because you're not there, on the ground with them every second of the day. You have to trust that they know what the mission is and that they've got some freedom of movement to go make it happen, instead of a lot of this micromanagement and bureaucracy that I see businesses putting on their teams.
It's really ironic that you frame it that way, and commander's intent was the next place that I wanted to go, because somehow we think that in private business there's more innovation that takes place, and clearly it does in well-run organizations and well-managed organizations. But you actually make the point that there may be actually more innovation in what may be perceived as a tighter org chart in the military than there is in business. Is that right?
Absolutely. I always felt that I had the ability to innovate and be creative. And I think that's why when people meet me and they're so surprised that I was in the military, because they say, well, you've got cool glasses, or you're doing this or that. You look too trendy to be in the military. And it's like, well, my experience in the military was that it was always very, very creative. Now, I was held to very high standards. That's the other thing. I mean, you want to hold your team to a high standard, but you still have to give them some ability. You got to give them some rope, some latitude. And so I think that's where people have this misconception. And I think then, unfortunately, it boils over into business because people might think, well, this is how we should be running a military organization. And I'm like, no, not necessarily.
Yeah, you've already talked about it, but one of the pro tips in this chapter was the readback method, and I guess why is it so powerful, and maybe even how can behavioral health companies use this to avoid like costly mistakes?
I think people are afraid to employ the readback method because they feel like people will like be offended that you ask them to read back what the mission is. And so you have to get over that cognitive bias. But it's something in the military that's really critical because you're standing in front of, and I use this example when I was at Fort Knox. This is back before the internet, in the early 90s. And they put us on video camera, right, reading our mission, reading our orders of the day. And it was so that we could see ourselves on camera and how we were, if we were, if our tone was right, if we're umming and on, if we're moving around, got our hands in our pocket. And I think that it's really critical the same way. You have to ask your team to now read back. It's almost like the telephone game. And I think that people are afraid because they're going to think, well, my team, but it's so helpful so that that they know what your intent was. And now everybody's clear. And it doesn't have to take too long, but it's such a small thing. Right. And people just kind of forget these small little tips that they can go, wow, they really do, understand. It's like, Chris Voss, who's the FBI hostage negotiator, he kind of talks a little bit about this in some of his books. And I think it's a really important technique that's so simple. Sometimes we overlook these little things that can pay off in such big ways.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, Lee, in my personal experience, I'm really big on using videotape because people, again, they don't really realize how they present. And so what's so powerful about the readback method is not only do they understand the mission, but you hear it in their words, or you hear it with their inflection or their body language, and you're able to show them and say, "Are you really bought in?" And then you have that opens that conversation.
I think that the military has done a lot of great things throughout its history because they've got these systems. And I think a lot of businesses fail to put some of these kind of systems in place. And there's kind of a basic framework, a basic structure that can really help. And it's things like the readback, which are kind of common.
We'll take it to the marketing battlefield now. And in the book, you talk about force multiplication and you talk about citizen soldiers. And, I've heard you say force multiplication on the content that we're producing many, many times as we've worked together. And I guess, with that, like what should CEOs of these behavioral health companies what should they be thinking about when they're thinking about force multiplication?
I think the first part is that a lot of people think marketing is like this black box. They don't understand what marketing is. They don't really understand what the marketing team is doing. So for me, coming in from military, I came from a CIO background into the CMO background. I want marketing to be a math problem. That's what I want it to be. I want it to be, let's make decisions objectively, not subjectively. And that is where this idea of force multiplication really came to fruition for me because von Clausewitz, he was a Prussian general, a contemporary of Napoleon. He put math into this whole idea about how to get militaries to be more effective. And it was this idea that x squared minus y squared equal the advantage. So x is one army and y is another army. And it was basically how many tools can you give to each army? How can you allow them to combine forces? And that was really going to be your advantage. Whereas in ancient times, it was just who had the biggest armies. It was all mass. Now von Clausewitz introduces this idea of combining arms, and that benefit is exponential. That's the key. It's exponential. It's not just add one, right? It's factoring it. And I think in the way that I apply that in the marketing is that if you'll look at marketing and you'll apply this math to it and it's exponential, it impacts your budget that way too. All of a sudden now, your content you're producing is not just costing this one factor, right? You're multiplying it and making it exponential, and you're spreading that cost into all the different channels that it's helping. All of a sudden now you're going, wow, that $5,000 video I produced was really not just a 5,000 video one time, the way of looking at it in mass. Now that video is helping us maybe recruit staff, right? And so it's lowering my HR recruiting fees. Maybe it's helping me with retention, right? Also, that video, maybe that becomes the podcast. Maybe that becomes the basis of a blog piece on your website. And all of a sudden it's now spread and you're seeing the benefit, factor. I think that was the key. And that's why I always had a very close relationship with finance, because it wasn't just me coming back asking for more and more and more. I was figuring out how to do more with what I had versus constantly asking for more money.
Yeah, man, that is such a powerful message too, and a great lesson, man. So,
yeah, because you think about in the in ancient times, especially during von Clausewitz's time and Napoleon's time, they didn't have the ability just to go, oh, let's just go. Let's go to private equity and get some more money. They had to figure out, wow, I've kind of got limited resources, which is kind of aligns with a lot of our small businesses, limited resources. So what can I do with my limited resources? Well, von Clausewitz figured out, okay, how to do more with what we have. Instead of, okay, I've got a soldier, why not put him on a horse and get speed? Okay, and while I've got that soldier on a horse now and he's got a sword, why not give him a carbine also? And why not give him more training? So yeah, all these things it's an exponential effect, and I think that it really plays well with small business because they're in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
You also talk about the citizen soldier. Obviously, this is something that I buy into tremendously. But I'm curious. It's like there are a lot of people who are listening to this podcast that they have programs or. They're running marketing teams or whatever, and for whatever reason, they're really nervous about engaging the citizen soldier. And by that, in this context, I'm talking about alumni. I'm talking about families. I'm talking about people who've benefited from the service. Mm-hmm. First of all, why do you think people are reluctant? And then what are they missing out on?
I think that they don't have the mental model right. And that's why I try to take these strategies and take these military strategies and convert them to mental models. So the idea is that, listen, when America was first founded, we didn't have an army, big standing army. So what do we rely on? We relied on our citizen farmers. We called them Minutemen. In times of need, they would go and get their rifle and join up, right? And it's the same thing in our companies. We're not saying that your staff have to always be working in marketing, but there's going to be times of need, and why not get them activated? Same thing with families of loved ones who have gone through your programs or alumni. It's the same thing. We're not saying that's your full-time job, but there are times of need, and that's your best soldiers are your citizen soldiers. And that was proven with the Minutemen, here in the U.S. It's also proven in the Roman times when, they didn't really have large standing armies, professional armies. They would call up their farmers, right, to go and do battle. And I think that's where I think companies are afraid to ask. And that's where I think if you'll just adjust the mental model, when I explain it that way, people go, oh, of course. And I use the example in the book. We did that with Heroes in Recovery. Like, we created a social movement, and we did 6Ks all over the country, and we got people activated, involved. So they didn't have to show up every day, but once a year, they would show up in their community. And the community would see the staff, and they say, oh, wow, you're with Foundations. I love working for you guys. You're now an employer of a choice, and families are now involved, and for very little cost. That's the thing. I mean, you're not breaking the bank on this, and everybody feels so good. And so I don't know why companies are afraid to engage. I use some examples of how some companies do a really good job. I mean, Starbucks does an amazing job, right, activating their citizen soldiers. I think if people will use that idea in the military strategy, it starts to kind of open up some thoughts.
Yeah, Lee, in this book, I love how you are really honest about setbacks, and I guess, just talking about lessons and failures and things like that. Was there a time in the marketing world that maybe you had a setback that, that you'd want to talk about, and maybe what'd you learn from it? How'd you recover from it?
Yeah, I think I think that's critical. You have to be honest, right, that you do have setbacks. And I think the way that I would answer that question is that we always would do tests, right? And the test didn't always go well. Somebody asked me recently in an interview what was the worst marketing mistake you made, and I said radio. And I'm sure there's going to be some people out there that still sell radio going to be really mad at me. But the thing is, you always want to have in your budget some ability to do some tests like, radio. And you want to measure it. And if it doesn't work, you need to be the first one to say it did not work. I'm always about adjusting. And, that's really critical in the military. I mean, a lot of times, especially if you're in field artillery, that first launch doesn't always hit the target just exactly right. And that's how you have to fire and adjust. And I think in business, sometimes we're afraid to admit that something that you as a CMO, you as the marketing leader tried, it didn't work. You're afraid they're going to get criticized. No. If you have the right kind of leader, you're not going to be criticized. You're going to be encouraged that now we know not to do that, but let's move those resources and keep moving forward.
Yeah, Lee, most people that work with you probably feel as though you never make mistakes. So you are pretty buttoned up on everything you do, and it is good to hear your just humbleness of, man, everybody makes mistakes. And so I appreciate you.
No, absolutely. I find that in the boardroom, and I find that in the executive leadership meetings, that it's people, you develop trust.
Yeah.
When you can share honestly your mistakes, because here's the thing. When you're hired in these especially in these senior roles, right, you're part of the team. They want to know that you're in the boat with them, and you have to develop that trust, because there is nobody cheering harder for you to be successful than your board of directors, than your other executive team members. There's nobody that wants you to succeed more than they do. Because believe me, they don't want to have to go and replace you.
Oh, yeah.
and I think that's the kind of the message that you have to get across to your team. And that's what I always try to do with my teams. It's like, whether you were the SEO person or the social media person, I'm not out to get you. I want you just being wildly successful. Tell me how I can remove barriers to your success. That's what I want to do. But a lot of times in business, we don't have those relationships. And I think that's one of the things that I think I was well known for, was that I had very good relationships with all my team. And it doesn't mean that I was at their house every Sunday night for dinner. No, I just had we had an open work environment. We all sat, in open IKEA desk. We knew what was going on. We were very family friendly. I think that was another key component of the work that we did. But there's nobody cheering harder for you than your teammates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sticking with the setbacks for a moment, you talk about organizations that fail to adapt. This one hits personally for me because you mentioned Kodak. And the reason I say personally is because my dad worked for Eastman Kodak. And so we watched the failure of Kodak not adapting. And it's, there may be people that are listening to this that don't even know what Kodak is, right? So maybe you can give us an example of why you selected that as an example for organizations that fail to adapt, and then how does that relate to companies that we work with now and things that they may, warning signs that they should pay attention to so they don't follow those same mistakes?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Jeff. I mentioned Kodak and Blockbuster, in that chapter where I talk about this, and a lot of it got down to misaligned incentives. And I think that sometimes we don't realize as companies and as business owners that we might give our finance team one set of incentives or marching orders. We give our marketing team another set, our HR team another set, and those can become misaligned and they can become at odds with each other. And that's the great example of what happened with Kodak. I mean, they basically had the opportunity to invent digital photography.
Yep.
But their incentives were aligned to they got bonus based on the amount of chemicals that they were consuming each year. Like, that's how they were bonused. So they created this weird misalignment where they were never going to be innovative, right, because of the way they had their incentives lined up. Same thing with Blockbuster. Blockbuster executives were being bonused on the number of brick and mortar stores that are open, not based on what kind of, and also late fees,
right,
versus like being open to incentives. But I don't think their boards really understood the impact. I think companies that way too. And I mentioned in the book, a personal example that happened to me at Foundations where we had marketing and finance, their incentives were misaligned. And I think if you're not careful and don't catch that, you end up creating these situations where you wake up one day and go, what happened? Because that's what's happened with Kodak. You don't hear about Kodak anymore. They're irrelevant. Same thing with Blockbuster. Blockbuster is irrelevant. And it was, and when you think about these businesses, I mean, my goodness, they at the time were the largest, and so it's always fascinating to think about how to, and that's why you have to realize that it can change really quickly on you, if you're not managing it properly and don't have the team set up and aligned correctly.
So what are some red flags that organizations could look at to make sure that doesn't happen to them?
I think that, especially in the executive level, everybody needs to know what the other department's incentives are. It should not be a secret. right? Now, I'm not saying you have to get into what people's salaries are necessarily, but marketing needs to know and communicate what their goals are. Same thing with finance. Like marketing needs to know what are finance's goals, and if you'll start to share some of those goals across the team, that's how you can start identifying. Well, wait a second. If we're reducing, if there's pressure to reduce, say, cost per admit here on the finance team, but marketing is being incentivized to grow in this way, how is that going to be accomplished? And I think that they, at the time we just didn't understand what that cause and effect was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's sort of like when Steve Jobs got up on stage and he had the Apple iPhone and he talked about it, and the very next day, the CEO of Palm got up on stage and he said, nobody's ever going to use a computer in your hand like on a phone.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So.
Yeah, who's going to do away with buttons?
Yeah.
Well, and see, that's where it's so fascinating about, again, we get back to this idea of commanding innovation. Like, we want innovation, but then we don't set up our structure, right, to really take advantage of innovation. And that's where I think a lot of times marketing, unfortunately, gets stuck in this tactic mentality. Mm-hmm. And it's like, they think marketing is, they're doing TikTok videos. Okay, that's not marketing. I mean, it's a tactic within marketing, but that's not your strategy. You have to start up here with your strategy, and then you kind of bleed into all these tactics.
Listen, we want you to innovate, but only within the box that we've defined.
Right.
It's like, I mean, we're going to give you very broad, bold parameters and just say, innovate all you want within this tiny little
space. The three of us, I hear this regularly. When I go out to do a consultation with a client, that'll be one of I'll ask them, as part of my, survey that I'm doing, and they will have very negative ideas about certain marketing channels. And I'm very open. I'm not saying you do everything, but I want to be open. And it is fascinating how they'll apply, and I write about it in the book, these cognitive biases toward different things you might want to try in marketing. And they're not, if you're not open, you may not realize where your customers really are.
Yeah. Lee, you've had the luxury of working with so many brilliant people over the years. And I guess, with that, who is somebody either in the book, maybe behind the scenes, that has really helped shape your leadership style today?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's going to be a lot of people get mad that I don't mention them right off the bat.
I bet.
I mean, I'm thinking about, Jeff Skillen and Mark Scrivner were so influential.
Beyond us.
Yeah, beyond the room here. I have to think, Ross Perot was a very important, person in the way that I viewed leadership growing up. And, I was his youngest, staff member when I was working on the campaign for him. And I think that, I wasn't sitting with him in all these top secret meetings, but I think I got to witness somebody that really lived a lot of the values that shaped me in that, he delivered commander's intent.
Definitely.
Right. And everybody in the company knew. And he would be somebody that you would run into in the halls. Right. And this, Pro Systems was huge. EDS was huge. But he's walking through the halls, and you never knew if you were going to get in the elevator, and he might hop in the elevator with you, and he might ask you some questions. And you better be ready to repeat what the commander's intent was.
Yeah. I always heard that about Ross. I mean, it's absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
And I think that's where I learned a lot of the ways that when I got to Foundations, that's why I had an open work environment. Because that's kind of, even though we had offices at Pro Systems, for certain aspects, it was just that management by walking around. Like, that was a key thing that I would hear him talk about all the time. So I think, he was super, important in the way that I, approached the way that I approach leadership today.
Yeah. Well, let's shift a little bit into putting some of this into action, if you're ready to go there. So let's, what is one military strategy from the book that you think marketers should implement today?
I will select Anvil and Hammer. And this is a really easy battle strategy to understand. It was an ancient strategy that was employed by ancient societies, the Carthaginians and Romans, but it was most recently used by Norman Schwarzkopf in the First Gulf War. And the idea from the military perspective is that you are going to have a holding force that's going to be your anvil. So in that example, Norman Schwarzkopf aligned all the Allied forces on the Kuwaiti, Saudi border. That caused Saddam Hussein to put all of his forces opposite. But Schwarzkopf was not going to attack from that angle. Right, that was his holding force. the attack and the win was the hammer that came in from the Western theater that outflanked Saddam Hussein's forces. So that was the military strategy that he won to great success. In marketing, the same thing can be true. You're going to have some of these channels that you may be employing as a holding. You may be investing in PPC as an example, and you may be doing that to tie up your opponents. That they see you doing that, you've got to respond, right? But your hammer might be something else that you're using to outflank.
Yep.
And in marketing, if you do not explain it that way to your team and especially to your leadership and to finance, they will come to you and go, hey, I noticed that the hammer's working. Why don't we cut the anvil over here, as an example? And next thing you know, you will start losing funding or support for some of these marketing initiatives that weren't designed to operate at the same efficiency or the same cost per. And all of a sudden you'll lose your anvil, and then you'll wonder what happened a few months later, why your hammer's not working. So I use that as a way to make sure that people can explain that to their teams, because the hammer doesn't work without the anvil. And that's where in marketing, I've been in many meetings, they say, Lee, just cut this.
Yep.
This doesn't seem to be working, just cut this. And I'm like, well, if you cut that, then your hammer over here that looks like it's winning the day won't work. And I think that's where these military strategies help explain. And when I would explain it that way, then people will go, okay, Pepper's quoting Schwarzkopf, so we might as well just sit down now.
Well,
That's a good one, though.
I mean, it's a really good one, and it not only is the tactic and the strategy important to understand, but I think you're underselling how important it is for you to be able to paint this picture for people so that they understand the strategy, as opposed to just focusing in on just this myopic view of just the hammer, for example.
Yeah, because if you just went into your team and you just said, well, we're doing PPC this month.
Right.
If you just leave it that way, maybe your team understands, but people who aren't in marketing, who maybe don't understand, revenue generation, they're not going to understand that the same way. So it's really helpful to apply the strategy, and I've used to great success the military strategies, that I applied in mental models, but there may be other strategies, but you've got to start with the strategy first.
The other thing that comes up is, as I read the book, and of course, knowing you as well as I do, there's a tremendous transparency here. Which, for example, when you talk about, the anvil and hammer, you're saying the team needs to know, the leadership needs to know. There are a lot of leaders out there that are very nervous about sharing too much information because they feel, I don't know what it is. It's like they would rather go into an organization and say, today we're only focusing on this, and they don't reveal that part of the larger strategy. What do you think makes people reluctant to share the whole picture?
Listen, I'll say Rob Wagner was one of the key people when I was at Foundations that helped get me over the secrecy thing. Because
okay.
you remember, Jeff, and I think Mark, you saw it too. We had that big war room. We had dozens of monitors. We were tracking every bit of traffic, data, and we would invite people all the time. Competitors, of course, we always looked at it as friendly competitors, but they would come in our office and they would be struggling in their business, and Rob would be like, "Yeah, is it okay to show them the war room, Rob?" "Oh, yeah, it's fine," because we knew they were never going to do it.
Right.
They were never going to do it.
Right.
And I think that's kind of held that I've always kind of held that belief too. Like it's more important that I get the message and the strategy across to my team and leadership, and I'm not going to worry about if some other, friendly competitor comes in and sees what we're doing, because I know they won't do it. And so I think that was one thing that we leveraged and we saw, because if you cannot translate your marketing work into this strategy that your CFO can understand, that your chief human resources officer can understand, your COO can understand, you've got a problem. Your chief clinical officer needs to know what your strategy is. And sometimes we confuse things because we get so detailed. We start talking about AdWords and paid search, and we understand it from a marketing perspective, but it's like gobbledygook when you're talking to the chief clinical, almost like when they're talking to us about some of their metrics. But you've got to translate that into something that's more easily discernible. And the military, it's a great example too, because you've got generals, commanders coming up with a strategy. How do they translate that down to the privates that are on the front line? They do. They're able to. And in business, we fail at that a lot of times.
This is a concept. Let's just stick with this for just a moment, because it sounds like you've gone through sort of an evolution of understanding secrecy to transparency, right? I like this idea of, and you're expert at this, skillful disclosure. And it's like, so how you sort of tread between what you know and, well, I mean, the military, we think secret plans. Secret plans is like nobody can know, right?
Yeah.
But yet some people need to know.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about just skillful disclosure.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think about, when I think about, especially in digital marketing today, and this kind of gets into this whole concept of allies a little bit too. There are certain things that we're doing in digital marketing that you might have a competitor that you think's a competitor that maybe could be an ally and could actually help you. And I think that that's where in behavioral health, and maybe it's a little bit unique, certainly not in healthcare in general, but we looked at a lot of our so-called competitors. Listen, there's 23 million Americans that need help for behavioral health, for addiction, issues today. There's plenty to go around. So why are we fighting over one or two? Like, we've got this whole big market that we're trying to, to provide our way of servicing those kind of clients successfully. And it's okay if you've got a couple of people that are competitors that you can identify as an ally, and maybe y'all are working together on some web stuff. Maybe you're working together on some video work that's going to help raise all boats, so to speak. I think when you're thinking about the military, it is interesting. I mean, there are certain plans that are being disseminated down, so you're going to kind of know your area. But there has to be really good communication and coordination. You cannot have it so secret that all of a sudden, your air support doesn't know what you're doing, right? Or your field artillery doesn't know what you're doing. So the Army has figured out how to communicate that within their ranks and their team successfully without being so secret. And I think in business sometimes we miss that.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating angle.
Well, and I talk about, who was in the book I write about the Theranos.
Yep.
And there's been some great podcasts on that whole episode, but I think I take a little bit different tack in the book, that I believe that the real failure there was this secrecy. Like that if Elizabeth Holmes had applied and just been more open about it and had a little bit more where people could understand what's going on, her team would have been there backing her up, trying to figure out things. But because she kept it so isolated and the teams didn't know what the other teams were working on, and it was very secret, she couldn't leverage this amazing team that she had put together. Right. She put together some of the best and the brightest, certainly on the investor side. She had some great staff, and if she had been more transparent and said, wow, we're really failing here, I think they would have leaned in and wanted to help versus like, oh, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what that department's doing. I don't know what that department's doing.
But not to go down to the Elizabeth Holmes story. I mean, fascinating, and it is a great example. I just wonder. I don't think there was a larger strategy there. I think they were towards the end. I think they were certainly sort of trying to make it up as they went along.
Yeah. I think transparency also helps your company and your team hold you accountable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because, if I was very open to what, as an example, in behavioral health, what our cost per admit needed to be. We were always trying to be 10% of net revenue. So it's not that hard to do the math. And so when there were months that we might be, instead of being in the green, we might be in the yellow, or if we were getting close to approaching red, everybody knew. It's not a secret. Whereas a lot of companies are like, well, I don't want the team to know that we're not meeting our cost per admit goal. We're not meeting. No. It was very transparent, because that's the team that's going to help get us out of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, perfect example. I mean, there are organizations that are really nervous about addressing the rank and file. How profitable are we as an organization? Yeah. It's like whether we're very profitable or whether we're not profitable at all. And I mean, even that is pretty fascinating when you think about it. It's like those soldiers could make a big difference if they had that information.
I think at Foundations, we were a for-profit company. And of course, we operated in the world with a lot of nonprofits in this space, and it can be really easy to criticize the for-profits in this world. But we were always wanting to be profitable so that we could reinvest in our people. When in behavioral health, when you think about clinicians are underpaid, they're absolutely underpaid. I mean, I think that's kind of universal. So, but if we were more profitable, then we could reinvest that right into better salaries, better benefits, better training, better equipment. I mean, there's a reason why the for-profit model can work. Now, it could also work. You can have poor examples where people are just extracting all the profit and not reinvesting it. But I think for Foundations, we had a mission that we wanted to, create lifetime relationships for long-term recovery. And every single person knew that. And so when that is your mission and it's communicated that way, and remember, it doesn't have anything to say about, that you're going to be cured, because, relapse can be part of it, but we wanted to make sure they knew if they struggled again with relapse that they were coming back to us. And we want, in that lifetime relationship then fits into having a relationship with the families, right, of our graduates, and with our staff. And that starts fitting into the whole financial model of lifetime value. Well, what's the best way to extrapolate lifetime value and have a lifetime relationship? I mean, there's ways to do that. And I think, Rob was our CEO, Rob Wagner. I think, he was one of these types that I didn't see eye to eye with Rob all the time. I mean, we had a lot of times where we were, it's just business, nothing personal. We just had, business disagreements. But, I think it's interesting, him coming from the background of being a social worker, and then I think he was a LCSW,
Yep.
And then getting into, being a CEO, that really gave him a good lens to advocate kind of our model. It's okay to be for profit, as long as we're doing great work.
Yeah. Lee, I mean, this book, after reading it, it's clear it's like a labor of love for you. And you pull together all of your experiences in life in a book that is very meaningful. It's very actionable, after reading it, it was clear. There were a lot of good takeaways. I guess you put it all together. And so what's something that after you've put all these thoughts on paper has kind of shaped the way that maybe you lead today or think today?
That's a good question. Maybe you should interview my kids. I think I write. I think at the end of the book, I think I did a shout out to my sons, Miles and Cy, and I said, look, boys, look at what a little bit of work every day can accomplish. And I think that gets back to the small wins, which I think are so critical. And I think we don't value some of that momentum, and I think it's really critical. And so I think that for the listeners, they need to be as excited for those small wins as to something they're thinking about that might be accomplished, in the next quarter or the next annual review. Like, it really does take these little small wins. And, my son Miles, he's a senior at Wofford, and he just took his CFA Level 1 test on Saturday. And I got to see him employ some of this. Now, I'm not going to take credit that I was the one that inspired this, but, he started studying in January for this test. And he had it all mapped out, how many minutes and hours a day that he was studying. And that's an example of, what's the quote, Jeff, where you can't, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time or something.
Yep.
I mean, I think that's the way it has to be. And people have to take this idea of never outmatched, which kind of means get going today. Like, don't put things off. You can figure this out. It's within all of us. You may have to go ask some questions or read some books or look at some YouTube videos or you can figure things out. You were hired. There's a reason why you made it through the hiring process. It's a reason why the board hired you or the CEO hired you. And just know that they are cheering for you so much. And even if you have some failures, that you can figure things out.
Yeah. Lee, as we wrap this up, I guess, is there anything that maybe we didn't ask you about the book, or, the impact you hope it makes? Or
one of the stories, I mean, of course I love every chapter of the book. And it's available at neveroutmatchedbook.com and at all major outlets. But I think one of the things that I did want to point out is a chapter where I'm using the example of the M16 that was put into action during the Vietnam War. And this is something that was a very innovative weapon at the time. And, the military produced many different variants of it. And when it first got deployed into battle, it was a big failure. And the reason it was a big failure was because they didn't ship the cleaning kits with it. And people weren't trained to clean the weapon, so it did not perform very well in that jungle, very humid, very hot environment. And I think a lot of times in business, we do the exact same thing. We go and say, oh, I bought this electronic health record, all problems are solved. Or, hey, I employed Salesforce. Or, hey, I hired Snapshot as my agency, problem solved. And they don't realize that, no. A lot of these things are only going to mirror your processes. And if your processes are poor going in, you're not going to get very good action on the other side. So I use that, again, as a great example where people are going to read that and go, oh, that's what I'm doing. I'm sitting in my office and I'm managing behind a spreadsheet, and I'm wondering why my business is failing. You know, they've got to get out there on the front lines and do the management by walking around and make sure that they've shipped the cleaning kits with their M16s.
Yeah, well.
So, Lee, I certainly know, and then I'm sure some people who are listening know how much work goes into writing a book. So I want to ask you, so what have you learned about yourself in this journey of actually writing this book, and then, now here it is in front of you?
Oh yeah, that's a good. I'm not sure that I was somebody that would sit down and just write a book. Because I'm kind of go. I got lots of irons in the fire. So I really think it helped me to practice what I preach, and so I created a spreadsheet, and I tracked how many words I was writing each day. And I didn't write every day. Some days, you're doing research. But I think for me, it just reinforced, because I've not been working full time, in a corporate world, since I left the Meadows, and so it does remind me that I still have it in me. I can still do some good work. I can still be creative. I can still make an impact, which is, I think, what keeps me, kind of motivated and interesting. So hopefully this book is, if I can just have it as just somewhat of a success. I've got ideas after writing the first one. I've already got ideas for a second and third. So I'd love to spend more time, digging into some of these other ideas that I'd like to publish at some point.
Nice.
Yeah. Lee, congrats on Never Outmatched. It's clear it isn't just a book. It's a calling card for a new kind of leadership in business.
And for our listeners, if you're trying to lead a team, a brand, or even just yourself, this book is your field guide. Bold, clear, and battle-tested.
Never Outmatched is available this September. Grab it wherever you buy books, and follow Lee on LinkedIn for updates.
This has been MasterMined with your co-host and your author in arms, Lee Pepper. If you find our content helpful, we'd be honored if you'd help us reach more people by subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing MasterMined. Based on what we learned today from Lee, don't just survive, win.
MasterMined, out.
That wraps up this episode of MasterMined. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, MasterMined is not just a podcast, it's a community. So don't forget to comment, subscribe, and review us. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you content that's relevant and relatable. Thanks again to our sponsor, Snapshot, a digital media marketing agency. And thank you for joining us on MasterMined, your behavioral health playbook.